Let's do another round of A Time to Think. Pastor,
Another round.
another round.
How exciting.
Pastor Josh Holland here, Pastor Chris Tillman. Chris is in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. I'm pastoring a church here in Wausau, Wisconsin.
We're actually
And
both in Wausau, Wisconsin right now. You're
yes,
not being tricked.
yeah, we have thought about doing some on-location stuff, maybe doing some, you in your office, me in my office over a platform, but I actually value the table here. I value being with you. I think it's just better conversation if we're here.
I like
so
seeing you in person, Josh.
you flatter me.
Thank you.
We're going to do another round of A Time to Think. The podcast we started for the simple purpose of thoughtfully, carefully engaging and responding to issues in culture and the church. We believe there's a vacuum of thoughtful, careful engagement. Most of the time we see reactions that are passionate. They are often ill-informed.
Yeah.
They're quick in their response. And
It's a Kirby quality vacuum, in fact.
a Kirby
Pretty
quality?
large, pretty significant.
So we seek to step back and spend some time thinking through these issues, and we hope that this is whether you're listening to it while you brush your teeth in the morning or in the car on the way to work or during a lunch break, that they would just help you think through some things maybe that you're seeing and you never really quite put the pieces together, and yet as we discuss them here, you go, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things we're discussing now, Chris, is our media diet, and we've talked about the nature of time, that we just don't have that much of it, and we need to count it. We need to count what portion of it we're using for what thing, and in relation to that we talked about purpose, because if we're going to count the amount of time we have, what purpose are we using that time? And now we're talking about temperament. And by temperament we mean, what is our amount of time or the type of media that we're consuming? What is it doing to our temperament? Because that's something we often don't consider, is that the content we're consuming and the amount of content we're consuming actually produces something in us, and often not what we want it to produce.
I find it so hard to believe that, Josh.
Yeah. Well, let me get you on Twitter, and I'll search some keywords, and
See if it does anything emotionally, right?
I'll watch you.
Yeah.
I'll watch you. In past episodes, we talked about headphones, and I mentioned I'd like to do an experiment where we put 5 people in a room, all with headphones in, and one person listens to like smooth jazz, one person listens to a sermon, one person listens to a sports game, and one person listens to political commentary, and then just do
That's only 4. We need a 5th person.
One person listens to white noise.
There we go.
And white, it's gonna make a white noise joke. White noise, not what is happening on Time to Think. And just observe, how do those different types of content change our emotions?
Yeah.
Chris, when we talk about content and our emotional engagement with content, what comes to mind?
Man, I think, media generally produces emotions, and I do think what comes most immediately to mind, however, is the production of emotion delivered by social media, and predominantly, and I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here, but when you scroll through a Facebook feed, and I haven't had Facebook for a handful of years, but before I left Facebook, they had changed, I think, the emoji-ish responses. So before it used to just be a thumbs up, like something, and then they changed it to like a thumbs up or a little huggy thing.
I like that one.
Yeah, it's nice, and a heart, and whatever else they do. A sad face, I think sad face was one of them.
Angry face.
Angry face, yeah. So all these different emotions that they're well aware that they're trying to help you express emotion on stories. But the problem is everything you're seeing that's supposed to produce a reaction in emotion is so insanely out of sync with how we're designed as human beings, because God didn't design us to be constantly assaulted by situation after situation within the space of, if you go like this and you flick through the feed that you have on Facebook, you may have seen 5 different stories with
That's
like one
super
flick.
interesting. You've got a puppy and then a person from high school who you now hate because of their political commentary.
Exactly. So you get, in the space of 30 seconds, you have the potential to feel
Wow.
sad, to feel angry, to feel, to see like a sponsored post from some type of, if you grew up in the 90s, this is, these are different things that show up all the time. And the result that's intended, if you think if you post something and you want somebody to react, You want a reaction. That's why you put it out there. You don't put it out and hope that nobody ever sees it.
Right.
You put it because you want people to see it. And so the way that, our temperament is related to this. I mean, I just when I witness these types of things, and like you said, you go on Twitter and you might read through comments people make about stuff, and it just like, F this. I mean, to complete strangers, people saying stuff that like, oh, man, this is obviously provoking something internally,
Right.
emotionally.
And what's interesting about what you're saying is it's meant to provoke.
Exactly.
So Facebook including an emoji of an angry face assumes they know that some of their stuff is going to make you mad.
And it gives you a space to
Isn't that
express
interesting?
it. Yeah,
Say,
exactly.
okay, we know that you're going to get mad here.
Yep.
We want to give you a chance to express
Yep.
it. That's fascinating. It can be innocuous too. I mean, I went on a date with my wife last week, and I felt like, do we take a picture? I mean, do we post this on Facebook? If we do, what does that communicate? I'm not trying to brag, but I know my wife likes to feel loved. And so there was this whole dialogue in my head of just whether or not I post a picture on Facebook. Well, I would never call 200 people and say, all right, first up, Chris.
Yep.
Chris went on a date with my wife tonight. All right.
Tell me your emotional response, Chris.
Next up, Paul. Hey, Paul, went on a date with my wife tonight. And next up, Wes. Wes went on it, and
And keep a tally of how many are angry over this, how many are happy, how many give you hugs, things like that.
yeah, babe, I called 300 people tonight, and I mean, pretty low return on investment. Only 100 people were happy for us. But even though we're joking about that, it does tell you a little bit. Two things I think stand out there. One, those are platforms that are designed for you to get some sort of reaction from other people.
Right.
Which means either you will get the reaction and it'll feel temporarily really good, or you won't get the reaction and it'll feel temporarily bad.
Yep.
So that's going to change you either way.
Yep.
And we all know it. There could be days where it's a glorious day outside, sunny, beautiful, in the middle of the summer, or we have an opportunity to be around friends and do fun things or be present in the community, and yet really what we want to do is hop on Facebook and see if anyone's liked our post.
What's going on? Yeah.
And that's doing something to
Yep.
us, isn't it? It's
Yep.
teaching us that we need to go to get that. And I think the other thing you mentioned that's really insightful, Chris, if you want to elaborate, is just the rush of changing emotions.
Yeah.
I mean, in what other avenues are you liable to be really like jovially laughing and then really mad in an instant? Movies don't do that to you.
Right.
Right? It's much more slow pace of motion.
Yep. Yeah, there was a gentleman who used to go to our church a couple years back and had some great conversations about social media. And something he mentioned to me was he kind of did this experiment where he removed himself from social media, and he somehow or another, I mean, bright guy, sharp thinker, he evaluated his attention span. He had some type of a test that evaluated his attention span. And when he removed himself from social media, his attention span grew significantly. And so
In a short period of time, huh?
yes, in a short period of
Wow.
time, within the space of a handful of weeks, his attention span grew significantly. And,
I could affirm that just in anecdotal evidence that
Mhm.
oftentimes I will be choiced with reading an article that I know intuitively will take me 20 minutes because I've kind of flipped
Right.
through it versus spending 30 minutes on Twitter, and I'll do the latter.
Yeah.
It's more enjoyable and easier for me to spend a larger period of time on more quick content to the degree where my wife was looking at me yesterday going, how do you read so quick? But then I'm like, 15, 20-minute article,
Right.
it's not going to hold me.
Yeah, and I think the funny thing is just, as somebody who was in broadcasting, you're well aware, when you would structure a news broadcast, you structured it based on emotion. Your lead-in story, your
And-
lead-out story,
And pace.
and pace, yeah. And so you're constantly designing your audience engagement around how will my audience feel compelled to stay with me, right? And so there's a fascinating documentary on Netflix, came out a couple years ago, called The Social Dilemma, I think.
Yeah.
Do you ever see that?
Yep.
Yeah. And so it's kind of a docu-movie or whatever, where it kind of dramatizes some of the engagement, but most of the documentary focuses on people who had been in the tech sector, specifically with
Mm-hmm.
social media,
Right.
and just basically reflecting on the fact that they didn't realize what they were doing when they commercialized human response.
Right.
And something that stuck with me from that I think was very helpful in understanding that even these individuals who are non-Christians, who don't look at time the same way that we might look at time, and look at human experience and emotion the same way we might look at it, they're self-aware enough as they evaluate what they put out to say, you aren't the product. Because, that's commonly what people say, like, well,
Mm-hmm.
social media, you're the product. That's why you don't pay money for Facebook, because you're the product. And what this person said, it's not that you're the product, it's your response is the product.
Mm-hmm.
Your reaction is the product.
Yeah.
Because how are they getting you to change? How are they getting you to engage and react a certain way? And that's obvious with advertisers,
Yeah.
because if somebody's going to advertise and say, hey, you should come and buy a new Toyota, well, it's obvious you should go buy a new Toyota for these reasons. But when you think about your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, people that you see on these news feeds, they're thinking the same thing. It's just not monetized.
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking, how can we get this reaction? And so what social media has done is it's conglomerated all of these different perspectives and stories that are intended to produce some type of a reaction. And that's why you're given likes and comments.
So people are posting things that they want your reaction. You're posting things that you want reaction. The people cultivating the space are knowing that they can cultivate your reaction,
Right.
and advertisers are looking for certain types of
Yes.
reactions. It's all about reaction, and so to step back and say, we used the analogy maybe a couple months ago of the environment of a room, and if you knew the room smelled foul and was full of nasty language
Mm-hmm.
and it was uncomfortable in temperature. I mean, all these things that are going to make you viscerally react,
Right.
and you choose to go in that room anyways, and you come out smelling bad and feeling dirty and hot.
Yep.
Like, you chose to go in there.
Right.
And it's not to say that every single thing on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram is vapid and
Right.
heinous. It just is to say there's a cultural environment in that room.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think about what it's going to do to me when I enter that room, because this happened to me the other day. You go in and you want to defend yourself, but when someone catches you doing it, you really have no defense. When I'm thinking, I'm in another room, my wife's asked me to help her clean up the kitchen. I go to return an actually important text message, and somehow my thumb hits Twitter. And I'm not even being joking there. You know that my thumb just goes there,
Yeah.
and she hears the refreshing noise of Twitter, and she's like, "What are you doing?" and that goes to show you that there are many times where I get on that platform without thinking about it at all. And so now I'm, without thinking, entering into a cultural environment that is going to change me.
Yeah.
It's going to make me jovial or angry, and that's what I'm thinking here is, how do we evaluate the emotional reaction that we do have?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are on Instagram, what does it do to you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, seriously, step back. It's going to
Yeah.
do different things to different people, right?
Yep.
It's going to cause some people to be envious,
Mm.
some people to be very angry,
Self-conscious.
self-conscious. Oh my goodness. Jealous, anxious, sad.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to step back and say, wow, actually, I might get on Facebook because I want to break from my day, but generally I leave Facebook, I leave Twitter, I leave it angry.
Mm. Mm.
That's something we should seriously wrestle with. We
Yeah.
talked about the purpose.
Yep.
Now we're talking, okay, well, is the temperament that media is producing in me, does that fit with the purpose of my life?
Yeah.
Because if I'm telling you, we're talking about this in the next episode,
Mm-hmm.
Chris, I just need to turn off. But then I go into a cultural environment that makes me more stimulated either
Right,
towards anger or
exactly.
anxiety. I haven't actually turned off.
Yeah.
It hasn't produced what I wanted it to produce.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is we just kind of take a step back and evaluate iterations of media over the past several decades. I mean, it's obviously exploded in different ways on our cultural landscape. But I think what really distinguishes social media from what we'll call traditional forms of media, whether it's news, whether it's entertainment on television, like a sitcom,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a movie or whatever, is generally speaking, you can pick and choose the mood that you are looking for when you go into. So, like, if you go to the news, traditionally speaking, not your goofy news broadcast where you would do
Whoa, whoa,
strange
whoa! That
things,
was a
jump in
service
swimming
to the
pools. Yeah,
community.
exactly. You
My
know,
Friday morning football pep rallies. That was community service.
yeah, I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. And I mean, to a degree,
Yeah.
even that. I mean, when I've spoken with people who had, before you were a pastor and they knew you from that, people would say like, I had so much fun watching Josh.
Cool. That was the goal.
Exactly.
That was the
That's the goal.
telos.
Exactly. And so they knew when they tuned in, that's what they would get. They weren't going to tune into you sitting there reading about
They weren't getting
murder
David
after
Muir,
murder.
from.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
wasn't a serious, like, you
Someone
know,
says, is David Muir still on CBS?
yeah,
I
or
don't know.
ABC.
ABC.
ABC, yeah.
I had so much fun watching David Muir. Like, whoa, you're a
Yeah.
sadist. That's wrong.
Yeah. And so, you think about movies. I mean, or TV shows, when you go into something, what you can generally like.
Right.
I watched M. Night Shyamalan movies with some of my kids this weekend, and I knew going in what it was. This is a suspense movie. I know this is what this is going to produce. I let them know in advance these are suspenseful movies. I didn't go in like you're going to feel fun.
Yeah.
You're going to feel
This is not
but-
the same as Finding Nemo.
Yeah, exactly. This is going to be a suspenseful
Finding Nemo's
thing.
a suspenseful movie.
There is a degree, isn't there? But when my eldest child, who's a teenager, she's like, I really like that movie. I really like that movie. And talking about one of them, she liked it because of the quality of the film, but it wasn't something that was a surprise. But when you log onto social media, when you get onto Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, you don't know what's going to come at you.
That's a good point.
Because it is produced for you specifically to respond. You have no choice in the matter. You may think that your reaction to something is something you are putting out there as like, I will react strongly to this. But you're not necessarily choosing to react strongly to that. You are reacting that way internally, whether you express it or not. What they're doing is they're giving you a platform to express those reactions, express those responses, and then to take that data and to try to determine how they can make you even more engaged emotionally over time. Movies don't do that. If a movie is produced, it's produced without thinking about Josh Holland. They think Josh Holland in a broad sense. How can we get males in the age 25 to 40 to watch this movie? Okay, we'll put these things together. We'll probably get this. Instead, on a social media thread, they know everything. I mean, when I went off Facebook, and I don't mean to go off a tangent on this, but I do think this bears discussion here. When I went off Facebook, one of the things you can do is you can look at your advertising data. And specifically, you can look at advertisers who have sought you offline. That is, these are businesses who have paid money to Facebook to find you. And so they have a little bit of demographic information. They may have your name. They may see that you sign up for a rewards program at a grocery store, a gas station, a restaurant, whatever. They may know basic information about you. But with the promise that's made through Facebook as an advertiser is that we can find this person to you and we can make sure that your content is delivered in front of their eyes. And when I went through that list, it just made me feel very, very vulnerable and gross because I'm looking through, I'm thinking, this business, like, what did they want with me? Over the several years I'd been on this platform, apparently somebody had decided they wanted to find me. And they did. And so I think all that to say, the intent of social media is to get at you individually to determine what makes you respond. And here, as we're talking about temperament, this is exactly what it's designed to do. Yeah. It's designed to affect your temperament. It's designed to affect your behavior. It's designed to affect your most basic responses by preying on what's already, and that's why we talk about echo chambers in social media, because they know what you want. They know what you like.
So you're kind of looking from a view of who is organizing it. That's helpful to know. Intended to draw reactions from you that can then be used. And you can't use information from people that aren't drawing reactions, right? You need those. A secondary look at social media and how much we consume it is, it's I don't really think it's particular to the advertisers or to the conglomerates that do it, but it's a venue where your idolatries can be pounced upon
Yes.
without you knowing it.
Yep.
And so, um, if you idolize being correct, Chris, you've pointed this out in me before that I have a tendency to want the last word and to be right. Well, what does Twitter do for me? I'm constantly able to see people and why I disagree with them. And then I can go to my wife and say, I saw this on Twitter. Here's why they're wrong. And I can continue to create in myself a habitual pattern of every time I hear someone speak, I need to tell them why they're wrong.
Sure.
I think something that is probably particular to, not particular as an only, but I sense envy and coveting. I've sensed it more in the women around me than the men around me. I don't know why that is. It's just an observation. That is so exacerbated on Instagram and Facebook because you're seeing pictures of people that are traveling or pictures of people that are getting engaged and you're not, or maybe you're married now, but you remember how fun engagement was and you're envious of the life circumstance. And if you're willingly engaging in those platforms repeatedly, you're bringing yourself back into that room where you can be around the thing that makes you envious. And that's where you have to step back and say, what is this producing in me? Am I, or maybe you're the type of person who gets very, very, very concerned about world events and you're drawn towards social media platforms because you can get news articles that are brought to you from different worldviews, but really it's just cultivating in you an anxiety about what's happening. And the only way to assuage that anxiety is to read more, but it makes you more anxious. And you can see how this in the self-righteousness of being correct or the envy of others or the anxiety about world events, none of those are what Christians know as fruits of the Spirit.
Sure. Yep.
Fruits of the Spirit: love, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. You might tag on contentment as something. It's not technically in that list, but contentment is great gain.
Yeah. The
Paul
Spirit
says,
produces that.
Right. And the stark reality is our media consumption does not generally produce love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, and contentment.
Yep.
And so if you're a Christian man or a Christian woman and you're experiencing anxiety, depression, and I'm generally here talking not about clinical, long-lasting medical depression, but like an average anxiousness or sadness or jealousy or envy. Is it because you're willingly engaging in a platform that is producing that in you? Because all of us no single one of us is devoid of those tendencies. It's just which tendency.
Yeah.
I don't tend towards anger. Other people do. And Facebook is going to produce in you a great anger. Right? Yeah. I don't tend towards anxiousness in regards to world events, but I do tend towards anxiousness in regards to what people think about me. So if I post something, I'm going to be constantly concerned with if people think it's smart or helpful. And so if I know that about myself, I'm less prone to post something because I don't want to deal with the anxiety of it. And I think that's a real thing as we talk about social media. What we haven't done, though, is talk about television. One of the things I've thought through, Chris, is so television, you've said already, does not produce the type of reactionary thing in you. But one thing I think it does produce us is a tendency towards picking easier things over hard things. So as far as changing our temperament, it teaches us the easy, pleasurable thing is the better thing to grasp. You're a married guy, you got kids, pretty standard American life as far as going to work, being part of a church, marriage and kids. How do you see television, even neutral shows, content-wise, television, teaching you to pick the easy over the challenging?
Let me ask a clarifying question.
Sure.
Would you say in regards to the content itself or the delivery platform?
I'm not talking. I think generally entertainment content would be classified as easy, right? That's why it's entertaining. We've talked in other episodes that entertainment in and of itself is easy because it doesn't challenge you.
Sure.
So I guess I'm thinking more about. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
get off work, you go home, you put the kid down. Gut reaction is to do what? For me, it's watch television.
Sure.
And I know in myself it's much harder to choose legitimate depth of engagement with my wife.
Yeah.
And so if I choose television, which it's just easier,
Yeah.
than having a topic of conversation with my wife, getting to know her, caring about her burdens from that day. If I choose that 14 out of 15 times, because it's easier.
Yeah, it's a consequence. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I've struggled with this. I mentioned this last episode as far as, there was a point in my marriage and our family life where it was like TV was almost like off limits. We didn't have a television until I think probably, and to be clear, we used computer screens for it, but, having television itself until, a handful of years into our marriage. And so I think what it does is it allows you to turn something on and to leave it on without thinking critically about it. Now, to be clear, we don't need to go through life, thinking critically. We had, over lunchtime, we had goofy conversation about lettuce. And is lettuce really a vegetable? And you can all send Pastor Josh a message telling him that it's not actually a vegetable, it's a leafy green. But we had this goofy conversation about, is lettuce a vegetable? And
which some botanists, respected botanists, I'd say,
you don't know how respected they
argue
are.
that leafy greens are vegetables.
Leafy vegetables, yes. And by those standards, we also concluded that fruits are vegetables. So I don't quite buy.
The same article said the fruit is the ovary of the plant.
Yeah,
which
well, we
is
can
kind of a naughty proposition.
We can agree to disagree
that.
over this. Anyways, the fact is that we looked into it, right?
Yeah.
So like you went on your phone and you started asking the interweb about how these complex issues of fruit, vegetable status, that kind of a thing. Now, as silly as the conversation was, the fact is that we were engaged in that process.
Sure.
When you turn something on in the background, you don't have to be engaged, right? So you can just kind of like leave it there and leave it sit. I'm 100% in this camp. Speaking with a sister in Christ yesterday, and she had said, like, I'm totally guilty of turning this particular show on in the background and just letting it go. And I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely there. But what's interesting is when I think about shows that I really love to watch, like there are a handful of shows I love to watch. The comedies I love to watch are comedies I like to watch because you think through it, right? And you think through the humor behind it. It's not just say like toilet humor or something. You have to think through it. And then some other documentary type shows, whatever. I love watching used to be called Live PD, but these are shows like you're engaged in the content, but you choose to be engaged in that content. And unfortunately, what tends to happen is that people will not recognize that they are being engaged by something, even if it's passively in the background. They're being engaged by something, and so the ease with which we can kind of turn something on and not recognize that we are being shaped on one level or another by what's happening.
Yeah.
And unless you turn it off. And then what's funny is if it's in the background, it gets turned off. You immediately ask the question, well, who turned this off? And I say, well, you're really watching that? Well, no, but, but so you were.
I'm not sleeping, my eyes were closed.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's super interesting because I find in myself, I can notice this is particularly happens on sports days where I am. If I'm watching a Tennessee football game, I'm engaged in the football game.
Yeah.
If I'm watching another football game, I might be on Twitter and the game, and it's two different noises coming at me at the same time, and it leads to just it's like having a ton of ice cream, where you just soda in one hand, ice cream in the other, and you're just consuming both, and then eventually you just feel strung out on sugar.
Yeah.
And I think that happens when we're just, because it's an option, the temperament, it leaves us kind of in a yucky place. And one thing I've thought about, Chris, is that, so you have some things that are stimulants, like caffeine.
Yep.
You have some things that are depressants, like alcohol.
And lettuce.
Or your friendship is a depressant in my life.
Why are you the way that you are?
So caffeine, you drink it because you know it's going to stimulate you, right? You want it, and it's going to stimulate you to give you energy. Alcohol is a depressant. If you have alcohol, you know it slows you down. right? Media seems, television, uh, social media seems to me to be both,
Oh yeah.
which I think is super interesting. It seems to both, and here's the example. Our phones or television, I think, are one of the only things that will keep us up when we're tired.
Mm,
So if I read if it's sun goes down, I read a book,
hmm.
I'm asleep in about 10, 15
Sure.
minutes. But I could be on my phone
Well, you're
for
trying to figure
45.
out what the words mean and everything, right? So it's hard on your brain. Just go
Yeah,
to sleep.
it's just I don't know what that is. But I can sit on my phone even after my wife asked me to turn the lamp off
Hmm.
and sit on my phone in the dark until I know it's way too late. I should
Yeah.
go to bed. But then I close my eyes, and you know that feeling where your eyes are still they're like
Yeah.
twitching.
Yeah.
It, and so somehow it's both stimulated me and left me exhausted.
Yes. Yep.
And I just thought I don't know what other drugs do that, but it seems unique where it can keep you awake longer than you need to be, but also tax you in a way
Hmm.
that is yeah, it's just I don't know. I thought about that the other day.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. Um so temperament any other things as far as how media consumption changes our temperament, our mind, our emotional, psychological life, or
Yeah.
spiritual life.
I think the most significant thing that I would highlight, and I would ask people to really take this seriously, um, especially if you're a Christian person and you want to honor God with how you relate to people around you. Um, what I have found is that the proliferation of social media has produced in us a tendency to depersonalize our relationships in such a
Hmm.
significant way. Like when I made the decision to go off of Facebook a handful of years ago, you have that initial conversation with yourself where you're thinking, what am I going to miss out on?
Mm-hmm.
What about these people? What about baby pictures? What about my cousin that I haven't seen in years, but I want to know what's going on, whatever. And here's what I told myself, and here's what I told people around me when I went
Says
off
to
there.
myself, I says, Chris.
I says to myself, what I said was, I want to be very aware of the people that God has put in my life
Mm-hmm.
directly around me. And I want to be as invested in their lives as is appropriate and warranted and as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And so
What am I missing out on if I stay
yeah, well,
on
that's
social
a
media?
good question to ask actually. And when I think, in our jobs as pastors, I mean, we have unique responsibilities to be present for people,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I think it's simply a good exaggeration of what God calls all Christian people to
Mm-hmm.
do, and that is to live in such a way, and this is why we love the church and we love the church's place to produce this, is to live in such a way where like you are visibly different than other people, in part because you are so engaged in the lives of others in a way that says you are more important than me.
Right.
And I think what social media has done is it's flipped it way on its head. We have this huge supposed breadth of relationship with people. We're constantly being engaged by what's going on in their lives, right? And yet we don't really know them. They don't really know us. What we put out on social media is what we want people to see. But then you ask the people, and you hear stories about these social media, quote, influencers who end up taking their own lives or they're hugely depressed or whatever. And it's because, you're alone with 1,000 people.
Yeah.
And that's what happens is you're alone with 1,000 people. And so as I think about what it's done to our temperament, I think our interpersonal temperament has suffered so significantly in that we just don't know anymore as a culture how to actually have relationships with
Mm-hmm.
people because we're so used to relationships being snippets of response, snippets of reaction, that we can't be present anymore. We can't be present with people because we always have to be thinking about what's the
Yeah.
next thing we're stimulated by.
That's so sobering, man. And I think this whole podcast series has been helpful for me, and I can hear it in you as well. As we're not speaking as guys who have figured it out yet, but as guys who are noticing problems in
Right.
ourselves as much as anyone else. And I think the idea of presence is so huge. I tend to be a guy whose mind operates pretty quickly. And what that can mean is I have a hard time not butting into conversations or not controlling conversations because periods of silence feel like forever to me. Uh, and where that plays into my family life is if I'm not in a direct conversation or I'm not directly involved with taking care of my kid,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, well, I want to be thinking about something. I'd rather be reading something. I'd rather be
Mm-hmm.
doing something. And where is that something? It's on my phone.
Sure.
And just to step back and say, I've noticed in myself in the past few weeks that for me, devices scream, you can be somewhere else doing something else right now.
Mm-hmm.
You could be downstairs watching the game. You could be on Twitter reading an article. You could be engaged in the follow-up to that conversation you read on social media yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
You could be listening to a sermon. You could be elsewhere right
Right.
now. And what you're saying is the response scream is be where you are right now.
Yeah.
Be in the room with the people that you're in right now. And you just think about what that means for a Christian is how God's very presence in the world through Jesus Christ shows us how important presence in the room is.
Yeah.
That, God chooses not only to have a salvation plan to redeem sinners from their sin, but to do so by inhabiting a body in the world with those sinners.
Yep.
And by to think about God in Christ meeting so many sinners face to face.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that when I was reflecting with some brothers in Christ on the way that God, he just speaks so differently to different types of people and shows that he knows their inner monologue and their inner heart.
Yeah.
And in that, all of that is showing just the abundant presence of Christ. And it's something, like you're saying, we're just not good at, because I'm talking to you on a podcast, and every time I look at the back of this phone, I think, I wonder what's going on there. I wonder if anyone's texted me. I wonder if I could be doing this. I wonder if I could be elsewhere. And vibrant, beautiful relationships happen when we're actually present with the people we're around. I guess I'll follow up just one last thing and say, God has given us a beautiful book in order to produce in us the fruits of the Spirit that social media often robs us from.
Yeah.
And so our anxiousness, our depression, our worry, our anger, often the fix to that is going to be to go spend slow time in the scriptures with the Lord, so that he, through his Spirit, can produce in us joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, and self-control.
Yeah.
So notice in yourself what temperament is being produced, and then go and find that other avenue through the scriptures, through the church, through worship, to have the fruits of the Spirit produced. Thanks for taking some time to think.